Welcome in, guys. It's Friday once again. How did this week go by so fast? But y'all know what time that means. That means it's time for Britt's Fantasy Blitz. I'm your host, Britt Flinn. Thank you so much for being here with us once again on a Friday. And it's already week 14. Some of you guys have already started playoffs. For some of you, it's a last minute playoff push to get in. For others of you, it's just a time to sit back and enjoy the bye that you've earned throughout the season. But whatever or wherever you're sitting, we've got you covered. We've got a ton of stuff to talk about this week. We are going to talk about, of course, the Thursday night football game recap, which was admittedly a lot more exciting than I thought that it would be. I had totally poo pooed this entire game, was not really excited. And the first quarter, I was like, okay, we might have a football game here. So we'll go over some of that. Of course, we'll go over the Start Ems Sit Ems for this week, some bold predictions, our DFS sneaky cheapies, and of course, our sleeper picks for this week. But while you're there, please throw your questions in the chat. I love hearing from you guys and interacting, and I love helping you guys with your lineup decisions. Put them in the chat. And while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can get all the amazing content that we put out on our YouTube channel. And also, a special thank you to producer Tony. Thank you so much for all the work you do. I definitely cannot do this myself. So really appreciate you being there and being the behind the scenes, especially graphic designer for me. So let's go ahead and jump into this Thursday night football recap because as I said, we were not expecting a lot out of either of these teams. And that's just not me. That was the entire betting community, the entire fantasy community. The over under on this game was 30 points. That's only 3.5 points higher than the Army Navy game. I mean, we were expecting this game to just be a complete dud. But of course, Bill Belichick came out and did Bill Belichick things. Bailey Zappi looked great, definitely much better than what we thought he would look like. And so let's just dive right into him because he had a night. I will admit, I was not expecting what I saw out of him. He finished 19 of 28 for 240 yards, 3 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. A lot of these passes did go to Ezekiel Elliott. I was honestly really concerned about what was going to happen in their passing game because they had no Demario Douglas. They had no Devontae Parker. Juju Smith-Schuster had been banged up all season long. They were down to only Ezekiel Elliott as their only running back pretty much. And yet he continued to fight through that adversity and was able to get the job done. So a really impressive job from the second year guy out of Western Kentucky. And another guy who had a humongous night was none other than Hunter Henry from Arkansas. He's kind of been invisible this entire season, but he was the beneficiary of 2 of those 3 Bailey Zappi touchdowns. Although he only finished with 3 receptions and 40 yards, those 2 touchdowns got him over the hill. And it was pretty amazing to see somebody from Arkansas hit the end zone. Not going to lie. Speaking of Ezekiel Elliott, he also found the end zone again on a pass, but he finished with 68 rushing yards, then had 7 receptions for 72 receiving yards. He definitely paid off if you were able to get him on waivers this week. And he led the running back section of the waiver wire article this week. Just hint, hint. He also got a pick six saving tackle. This guy came out of the backfield, still showed some speed. He wrestled that guy down on the sideline around the 20-yard line to save that pick six. I think that you can pretty much give credit to Ezekiel Elliott for helping them win that game because without that tackle, had that gone back for that score, it would have been very difficult for the Patriots to come back. So kudos to Zeke. Great to see him out there. Although I much would rather see him in Dallas than a Patriots uniform, it is what it is. I mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster. He showed that he was still alive with Devontae Parker and Demario Douglas out. He had 4 receptions for 90 yards. Not great as far as a reception total goes, but man, he was able to get those yards. It was a really promising performance, but unfortunately, it is a little too late for them as they've already been eliminated from playoff contention. Right now, it seems that they're just lobbying for draft picks. And I know that some of our Patriots faithful were maybe on the down low hoping that they were going to lose that game so that they would have a higher draft position. But that is not the Belichick or Patriot way to intentionally lose a game. I see you guys here in the chat. Toronto Dave, what's up? Thank you so much for joining us. Sellers, always great to see you in the chat. And then Fish and Boogie has a lineup question: DK Metcalf or Cortland Sutton? Chili over Jack over Chili for the win. I'm actually leaning Cortland Sutton here. He not only has a great matchup against the Chargers, but on the other side, DK Metcalf is going against the San Francisco 49ers. Geno Smith is dealing with a groin injury now, on top of that elbow slash arm injury that he had been dealing with. And I know that he looked really great last week, but I don't know if that was a one off or if he's going to look good. I feel more so like Geno Smith is just going to be pressured the entire game, especially if they don't have a run game to fall back on with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet injured. So I would definitely go Sutton here. And then Angie in the chat, always great to see you. Happy Friday to you as well. And you have a gross one. Have to play Bethard or DeVito in week 1 of the playoffs. Winston, Ritter, and Levis are on waivers. So I'm concerned about Bethard. He has been limited with a shoulder injury on his non-throwing shoulder all week. Trevor Lawrence is also potentially going to play. He has been practicing, although in a limited fashion. I don't think that he's going to play, but you still have to worry about that. DeVito hasn't looked that bad, to be honest. So I may roll with him because all that weather is going to be moved out that we're concerned about this week. Winston, Derek Carr is practicing, so we're not sure what we're going to get with him. Ritter, I would feel much more comfortable with Ritter if we knew the status on a bunch of these defensive players against Tampa Bay. If Vita Vea is out, which it's trending towards him being doubtful, I think that they run the ball a lot more than we're thinking that they're going to. And I just don't necessarily know what Ritter can get done. I think it would be DeVito and then Ritter as my top 2 options. But yeah, you're right. That's gross. But best of luck to you. Hopefully your opponent is also dealing with similar injuries because that bug has been going around for sure. So let's jump over to the Steelers. And first off, we just have to talk about what an absolutely rough outing it was for Mitch Trubisky. Steelers fans, God love you, but y'all are unforgiving. They were chanting Mason Rudolph before halftime, even. They were not happy with what they saw out of Mitch Trubisky. He finished with 22 completions out of 35 attempts for only 190 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. Although he also did have a rushing touchdown to kind of salvage his fantasy value. Now, on the flip side, they could not get the run game going at all. If you thought the passing game was bad, the run game was terrible. Najee Harris had 29 yards on 12 attempts. Jalen Warren only had 11 yards on 7 attempts. It was very, very bad. Deontay Johnson was the leading receiver with 3 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown, but the rest of the receivers were just all over the place. George Pickens, 5 receptions for 19 yards. And I want to pull up a chart that Next Gen Stats put out on Twitter because hearing 5 for 19 is bad enough, but actually seeing this chart and seeing the routes that he ran, how short those routes were. I mean, it was absolutely awful. A couple of those were right on the line of scrimmage, behind the line of scrimmage. I mean, it was horrific. You have a deep threat like George Pickens and you're running uh horizontal routes like that with him. Like, just what are you doing? And then Mike Tomlin cursed him out, or not cursed him out, but got in his ear a little bit on the sidelines. And it's like, you're not sending him downfield. That's where he thrives. So I don't know what you expect him to do when he's running routes right at the line of scrimmage. You just can't get upfield like that. Really poor usage in that situation. And obviously, the efficiency that he saw was just horrible. Mike Tomlin himself has also fallen on some criticism after back to back losses at home against the Cardinals and the Patriots. And some are calling for his coaching job. It is kind of a little insane to think that we're here, as Tomlin has been the coach for the past 16 seasons. He's had a very good track record as their coach. But much like Bill Belichick, who has also been under some hot seat and some fire, Tomlin hasn't been able to do much with his franchise after he lost his franchise quarterback. And so we're really seeing some butting of the heads. Is this coaching? Is this the inability to find a good quarterback in the draft? Right now, we don't really know, but it does not pass the eye test. And Steelers fans are, again, they are brutal. They are a very proud franchise. They do not suffer mediocrity very well. And I don't think that Minka Fitzpatrick does either. He sounded off against the effort that his team put in during the loss, saying, in order to see the fruit, you've got to toil for it. Pretty much throwing some shade on the effort that his team put out. And I don't think he's the only one disappointed with the effort. Just a very bad showing all the way around. But hey, we at least hit the over in this game. It wasn't a total blowout, not exactly what we were expecting. So let's be thankful for that. And remember that in a few weeks, we will be complaining that there is no football on Thursday night. So let's just be grateful that we still have football. And great to see you in the chat. She's got a question. Need two in PPR. Roshan, Rasheed, Shakir, and Amari with Donta back and possibly Knox and Amari probably sitting. Which two am I leaning? So I'm definitely going Rasheed Rice here. That's a lock. I think probably I'm going to go with Shakir here. That running back situation in Chicago is just too up in the air, especially with that three-headed backfield monster. Roshan's not been super efficient either. I know that he's been catching passes, but I would rather take a chance on Shakir and him potentially getting some longer downfield looks than I would on Roshan potentially working out of the backfield. Amari, even if he does play, I think that that game is very, very messy. It's shaping up to not be great. It's another one with a very low game total that we're not looking at. I cannot trust in Cooper, especially if Flacco is there, because it seems like Flacco likes to look towards Elijah Moore over Cooper. So that's where I'm at with that. Robert in the chat, great to see you. Hello. And I have seen the new Dak commercial, and it is some funny S. Hashtag here we go. I saw it this morning when it was first posted. I was cackling in bed. If you guys haven't seen it, I will retweet it on my Twitter at Britt_Flinn. Make sure to go check it out, not only because it is a great marketing commercial and very funny, but also because it does have a great message. So make sure to go check that out. And you know what, Dag? Here we go this weekend. We are going against the Eagles on Sunday Night Football, and I am so ready for that game. I mentioned the weather just in some top news. It hasn't been a very heavy news day or news week, to be honest. We're nearing the end. Not really a lot to talk about more than popcorn headlines. But I did mention the weather, and we may be set up for some very, very bad weather for several games this weekend. There is an atmospheric river moving over that is supposed to gain some steam as it passes over the Great Lakes. It looks like the two games that are going to be most affected right now are in Baltimore and potentially Cincinnati and in New York in the Jets game. So be prepared as you make your lineups. This is not just a very heavy rain situation. There are going to be some very high winds predicted with this, and we know that that can affect the passing game. So just be aware, make sure that you check the weather on Sunday morning as you set your lineups, because there is nothing worse than thinking that, oh, everything's hunky dory, and then it moving to a complete run game and just because of the weather. So keep your eye on that. Injuries, however, we do have a lot of. It is that time in the year where we are getting towards, everybody's banged up. Everybody's been through a lot. The bye weeks have come and gone. There's not really a lot of time to heal. And there's also, it's the time of year for flu and cold. And that's what we saw in Baltimore yesterday with Lamar Jackson. He didn't practice yesterday due to an illness. Apparently, there is a flu type bug moving through the locker room. So just keep an eye on that and all your players. Hopefully, nobody else is affected. But this is anytime there is an illness situation, it's worth monitoring. Now, I will say that right before the show, Harbaugh came out and said that Jackson was on the practice field and was full of life. So, yeah, take that as you will. I think that he looks good. So he should be good to go for Sunday. But again, in a really yucky weather game on top of it, how much are we expecting from him? Dawson Knox for the Bills was a full participant in Wednesday's practice which is setting up his return from injured reserve. As Ann alluded to earlier, with Knox coming back, that could affect Khalil Shakir and his snap share because I don't think you're going to pull Dalton Kincaid. It's going to more affect those slot receivers instead of that tight end. So that's something worth monitoring as well. Hayden Hurst and Tommy Tremble for the Carolina Panthers were limited in practice Wednesday. And we found out earlier in the week that Hayden Hurst was unfortunately diagnosed with post traumatic amnesia. Not a good thing to hear when it's that severe of a head injury. I believe that it was Luke Kuechly a few years ago who was diagnosed with the same situation. Very significant injury. We're not sure if he's even going to play again the rest of the year. So if you were holding on to Hayden Hurst in a very deep league, just be aware of that. Tyler Boyd for the Cincinnati Bengals was limited in practice Thursday. Not really sure what's going on with him. There are lots of injuries for the Cleveland Browns as Kareem Hunt, Amari Cooper, and Dorian Thompson Robinson were either limited or not practicing to begin Thursday's practice. They are not naming a starting quarterback until Sunday morning, which is just great for us in fantasy, right? I do expect, however, that it's going to be Joe Flacco, that they're going to give DTR another week. And at least Flacco does have that veteran experience to go out there and potentially keep them in that playoff picture. For the Dallas Cowboys, backup running back Rico Dowdle was limited in practice on Thursday, but he is the only one that's holding a tag, which selfishly is great news for us. Packers running backs A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones were both limited in practice, with wide receiver Christian Watson uncertain to play on Monday night. He went down with that hamstring pulled up. He dealt with a hamstring early on in the season. So if that happens, look towards Romeo Dubs, look towards Jaden Reed. There are lots of great options that are still out there that you can plug and play for Watson. And with Luke Musgrave out, there are a lot of targets to go around. So keep that in mind. Texans tight end Dalton Schultz also didn't practice again Thursday. He missed last week, not trending towards him playing this week. And even if he does, they have that nasty matchup against the Jets in some bad weather. So you might not even want to put him in your lineup to begin with. In some surprising news, Trevor Lawrence did take part in practice both yesterday and today, although it was on a limited basis. We mentioned that backup CJ Beathard was also limited due to an injury on his non-throwing shoulder, and running back Travis Etienne and wide receiver Zay Jones were limited as well. Obviously, Christian Kirk is out with a core muscle injury, and earlier today they placed him on injured reserve. Not something you want to see and or hear this late in the season. Super unfortunate. For the Kansas City Chiefs, Isaiah Pacheco hasn't practiced yet this week with a shoulder injury. He didn't practice again today, so it's really trending towards him not playing. Jerick McKinnon's also banged up, so this could be a CEH game. Those of you who have held on to CEH in Dynasty, now might be your one and only chance to play him. For the Chargers, wide receiver Josh Palmer returned to practice, but it's not certain whether or not he'll suit up or be activated. Tyler Higbee didn't practice Thursday. For the Dolphins, Raheem Mostert and Tyreek Hill didn't practice yesterday, but it is likely more rest related than it is injury related. Justin Jefferson is returning to the Vikings lineup after spending some time on IR, and I cannot wait. I stashed Jefferson. I refused to trade him. I kept him on my IR spot, and he's returning just in time for the playoffs. So love to see that from him. The New Orleans Saints are very banged up, however, with Derek Carr, Taysom Hill, Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, and Juwan Johnson, all holding questionable tags. We don't yet know if Carr is going to get the start or if it's going to be Jameis Winston. It's just kind of a very messy situation there. And then a couple more, just wrapping the injury report up. Darren Waller was running routes this week for the first time since he was placed on IR, so his return to action could be nearing. Now, it's not like we exactly trust him, but this is still news. So you held on to him. It is what it is. Jets running back Brees Hall says that he expects to play this Sunday, but he also hasn't practiced all week this week. So just keep an eye out for him. Also, with the state of that Jets offensive line, I'm not exactly sure how efficient he's going to be anyway. And then finally, the Seahawks have some major issues on offense with Geno Smith limited at practice due to a groin injury, as well as running backs Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. So You need to rewind that. Make sure that you go back to the YouTube channel. You can rewind, rewatch this as much as you need. We will be posting injury updates as we get updated. And we'll also be talking about them Sunday morning on the Start Sit show with myself and John and Pemba at 9 a.m. Eastern. So there is that. Anne asks, do I think Aaron Jones will go? I honestly don't know. I have him in a couple of leagues. Right now, I'm plugging him in um, more out of hope than anything, but he has not been very healthy this season. So I'm not exactly counting on it. I think they may give him one more week. So just, it sucks. It's very unfortunate. And then would I start Damian Pierce over either Dubs or Brandon Cooks? Um, no, I don't think so. I know that Pierce got more of the action last week over Singletary, but he was still super, super inefficient. That touchdown was a fluke. It padded his box score. I don't think that Pierce is the same guy that he was last year. And thank you, Chargy, for the nice words on the injury update. So last night, I know a lot of you guys who've been in here throughout the duration of this season have heard about BetterCast app, but for the ones who are new and just joining the show, I want to know what you're waiting for. We had the Bender cast last night with Howard Bender. I believe Jim Bowden joined, a couple other amazing guests that we had on there. And not only do you have a great opportunity to connect with and chat with the community as these games are going on, but you can answer questions, you can answer in-game props, and if you win, you can redeem those tickets for real, authentic merchandise. So to download the BetterCast app, scan that QR code on your screen, or go to the Apple app or Google Play Store, and it is free to play. Join in every time. We've got trivia. It's not just for football, but we've got trivia for college games, especially with bowl season coming up. There's going to be a lot more going on there. Basketball, everything that you can think of. There really is something for everyone. And it's such a fun way to engage in the community. So go make sure, download that app and just jump in and hang out with us. We also have the Fantasy Alarm All Pro subscription that we are still offering. We've got our matchup previews, everything with DFS, all of our tools, our Discord channel where you can talk to all of our experts. Everything that we offer is part of that All Pro subscription. So go to fantasyalarm.com/win today. Use promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first monthly payment. Or if you want to get there really fast, just scan that QR code on the screen and just join part of the family. We'd love to have you. So we're going to take a real quick break, but as we come back, we are going to dive into the Start Ems Sit Ems, our bold predictions, and our sneaky cheapies. So hang tight. We'll be right back.
From the Hometown Hero series, Zach Parise.
That is a very nice card, and that's one I'm probably going to have to organize a little trade ski with you, because I would actually like that card.
You got downtown Newark in the background. I mean, Newark has never looked so good.
No, it is not.
We'll put that back up on the screen. I just want to have a penny sleeve ready, and yes, we can absolutely work out a little trade ski for that, because that belongs in a Devil fans collection right there.
I'll trade you the Braden Schneider rookie card for it.
Done.
There we go. The first card-for-card trade on Rip and Riff history. And it was that easy.
It was that easy. That's because, you know what? Because neither one of us are jerks. And it's the same thing when we try and do fantasy trades. Like, we don't try and screw each other. We have conversations. If there's a fit, there's a fit. If it's not, it's not. We don't try and, take the other one over the barrel. So there you go. In a penny sleeve. Hometown hero, Zach Parise. He was among the league's most productive goal scorers in 06-07 and followed up with a terrific regular season with an even more impressive postseason. And then they talk about what he did in the first round series against Tampa Bay that year. So that's off to the side for you.
That's true. And, if this is it for his career, he had a hell of a career.
He did.
Hopefully he comes back one more year with the Islanders, but if he doesn't, hell of a run.
All right, guys, welcome back. Thank you so much for bearing with us through that break and for hanging out with us. Really appreciate you guys today. We did get some news during the break when I was checking my phone. We got some injury updates. Isaiah Pacheco has been ruled out for Sunday's game. So Depending on the status of Jerick McKinnon, it may be a Clyde Edwards-Helaire week. Also, regarding Dawson Knox, he has practiced, but he has not been activated yet. So it's not sure whether or not he's going to play. So, and going back to your question earlier, I think that Shakir may be the play there if Knox is out another week. So there we go. We're always live. We're always on top of it. But let's jump into some Start Ems Sit Ems real quick. And as always, I like to do an accountability check and talk about some hits and misses from week 13. Had a very good hit on sitting Drake London. He was wide receiver 83 with just 1.8 PPR points. Again, going up against the Jets as an outside receiver is not something that is exactly great or conducive for fantasy production. So that one kind of went without saying. We also said to start Sam Howell. It was a little bit hairy. I'm not going to lie. I was a little bit nervous about this call, but then he did finish as QB9 with 20.9 fantasy points because he did get those 2 rushing touchdowns that kind of salvaged his day. So let's go, Sam Howell. And then another hit, Rachaad White was RB10 with 19.6 PPR points. I don't know if you can find another guy that's more consistent in this offense than Rachaad White has been. It seems unfortunate for Chris Godwin, as it does feel like Rachaad White is taking away some of those targets from Godwin, but it is what it is. As far as running backs go, if you have a guy who's taking that many of the snaps and that many of the carries, you've got to start him pretty much every week. Now, I did have some misses, as always, one of which was Christian Watson. And I wrote in my notes, laughs maniacally. I did not expect Christian Watson to have a great game last week. I especially did not expect him to have 2 touchdowns. And just imagine what he could have done had he not gone out with that injury. So womp womp, you win some, you lose some. And another one was to start Jaylen Warren. I thought that the Steelers against the Cardinals were going to be set up to run the ball very heavily. Obviously, it did go to Najee Harris. Najee had a decent game, but they just could not really get anything going in that run game, and they got beaten. So unfortunately, it is what it is. But I like to hit more than I miss, and it seems like that's where we're at. And of course, as I start this segment, this is just a suggestion in case you don't have another viable, or you do have another viable option. Obviously, in the sit-em section, I don't want you to go pick up a scrub on the waiver wire just to replace one of these guys on the sit list if you don't have anyone else. So, for example, if you don't have a backup quarterback or are dealing with injuries to your guy, don't go pick up just some random quarterback to plug in unless you're really, really desperate. And Angie, I already had this written. This is no shade to you and your quarterback question earlier. So before we jump into the stardoms, I'll answer these questions real quick. Anne needs 2, Eckler, Javonte, and Moss. I'm going to go Eckler and Moss here. I know that Moss disappointed last week, but the matchup was much tougher. I think that he has a much better week this week. And same with Eckler. If he can't get it done against the Broncos, then what are we doing here? Chargy also asks, I have Dylan in my lineup now, but I have Charbonnet and Spears on my bench waiting for late injury updates. Yeah, I think even if Dylan plays, you've got to start Dylan. I'm very worried about Charbonnet going up against the 49ers. Their defense is just so good. So for the first stardom, I'm going to go with Justin Fields against the Detroit Lions. In their first matchup against the Lions in week 11, Fields really didn't have great passing numbers. He only threw for 169 yards and a touchdown, but he did have over 100 yards on the ground. And that Lions defense was really great in the first part of the season, but they have given up quite a bit of yardage over the past few weeks, and they do perform considerably worse on the road, giving up 260 passing yards away as opposed to just 223 at home. So even if Justin Fields isn't able to pass all over them, I think that the rushing upside that he offers really cannot be understated, and he is set up to have a very, very big day. Next, I do have Zach Moss, the aforementioned disappointment from last week. But I know that he was on everybody's must-start list last week because of the volume, but he wasn't for me. I was really concerned about that matchup against the Titans, and it kind of, ended up that way. After that performance, though, people might be off him, but this is the week that I have full confidence in him going forward. The Bengals are allowing the sixth most rushing yards per game and the second most rushing yards per attempt. And with Moss's pass catching ability as well, he does have some added upside. That weather may clear out from that system that we were talking about, but it's still going to be cold. And we typically see at this point in the year that people tend to run the ball more when temperatures drop off. So I really like that from Zach Moss. I think the dogs agree. They're doing some construction over. So if you can hear them in the background, I apologize. But my second running back is Austin Eckler from the Chargers. And it feels very weird to put Austin Eckler on this list as he usually is a plug and play guy. But let's be honest, he has not been that guy lately. He's seen 3 straight weeks of single digit performances. But this week against the Broncos, he is set up for a bounce back game. As much as the Broncos defense has improved, they're still not very good against the run. They are allowing the most fantasy points to the running back position and 123.7 rushing yards per game over the last 3 weeks. Eckler also has that unique skill set as a pass catching back as well. So I think he should be able to rebound. Again, if he doesn't get it done this week, I don't know if we can start him the rest of the season. Moving on to wide receivers, I really love Cortland Sutton this week. And I've talked a little bit about this and why, but let's dive into it a little bit deeper. Sutton has been one of the most reliable receivers in the entire fantasy community this year, even if he hasn't really been flashy. And now he gets a matchup against a very soft Chargers defense. Dean Leonard has come up since everybody else in that secondary pretty much stinks, but he's still a 7th round rookie from last year, and he hasn't really shown much at all. The Chargers as a whole in their secondary are allowing the third most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position, and Sutton really has been a red zone magnet. So I absolutely love him this week right here going up against a soft secondary. And my second wide receiver is Drake London of the Falcons. Really, everyone else on this Falcons offense, including Drake London, is matchup contingent. And last week he was on my sit list, which we just talked about. Came in because he was an outside receiver working up against Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. However, this week he gets a matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have really struggled against the wide receivers. They are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver position, and London should get a matchup against Carlton Davis. Now, how bad is Carlton Davis, you ask? Well, he's allowing 2.01 fantasy points per target and 14.1 fantasy points per game. So it should be a huge day for London against a divisional opponent, and which is a very important game to keep them atop the division. Finally, for my tight end, I'm going to look at Isaiah Likely. And I know I was shying away from this game a little bit as it did look like it was going to be heavy rain. And although weather is still a concern here, it shouldn't be as much of a deluge as we initially thought. It should just be a mix of lighter rain with some wind mixed in there. The matchup against the Rams is so good because the Rams cannot guard the tight end at all. They're giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to the position, ranking 29th in DVOA. And with wind as a factor, I think they do choose to utilize the short and intermediate routes where Likely's going to be lurking. It should be a very, very good day for him. So let's jump into a couple of questions here before we move on to our sit-ems. George asked, should I drop Charbonnet and pick up Jerick McKinnon? I don't know if I would do that, to be honest. It depends on what you need this week. We still don't know, again, if either one of these guys are going to play. And McKinnon hasn't had a great season. He really hasn't been a factor in anything this season. Even Isaiah Pacheco has been taking over his pass work. Now, I know Pacheco's now out, but we still don't know if McKinnon's even going to play because he's still questionable. So I would table that question until we get a few more updates on the injury situation. But even then, I don't think that I would. I think that I would stick with Charbonnet because even though they have the 49ers this week, the schedule does get a little bit easier going forward for them. Kyle, should I drop Purdy in my guillotine league in favor of Fields? I'm typically against dropping people to just pick up a lateral option. And that's kind of what I feel you're doing here. Purdy has just been so good this season. He's had a couple, dropped games here and there, but for the most part, he's been really great. And when it comes to quarterbacks, I would rather have the guy on the better team, the better offense. And that's what we're looking at here with Purdy. So I don't think I would do that. Just stick with what you got. So moving on to the Sit-Ems. First off, this feels very, very uncomfortable at the least to say, but Justin Herbert makes my sit 'em list this week. And we mentioned earlier that the Broncos defense has improved a ton since the beginning of the season. And on the flip side, Justin Herbert has really just crumbled. We can play the blame game all day long as to whether to blame the play callers, the receivers, whatever. But the fact is that 3 out of his last 5 games have resulted in a fantasy outing of 14.4 fantasy points or less. This is not what you want when you're going into the playoffs or trying to make a playoff push. The Denver's defense also over the past 3 games have only allowed 212 passing yards per game, which is middle of the pack. But if Josh Palmer doesn't return this week, we could see much of the same from Herbert. I don't have a lot of faith in his production, especially if and when Austin Eckler is such a large part of the game plan. So if you've got, this is one of the situations where if you don't have a good backup, don't go scrambling. But if you do have a backup for Justin Herbert, I would look at potentially starting them over him this week because I do not like that matchup at all. Next up, I've got Breece Hall of the Jets. And yes, sure, you used to be able to run against the Texans, but this year they have really not made it that easy. They rank 13th in rush DVOA, and the entire Jets offensive line is banged up. They are also making that switch back to Zach Wilson, which does limit some of the pass catching upside we've seen with Hall in recent weeks with Tim Boyle. And when he's just forced to run, it really hasn't looked good. Even against the Raiders, he averaged 2.15 yards per carry, 2.3 against the Bills, just 1.23 last week against Atlanta. I'm just not a big believer in Hall's efficiency or fantasy value this week. Another guy, and I'm going to preface this by saying that no, it's not just because they're playing my Cowboys, but it's DeAndre Swift. I really do not think that Swift has a good week this week. We already have a little bit of a sample size from the last time these two teams played. And in that game, he carried the ball 18 times for just 43 yards for an average of 2.39 yards per carry. Then last week, against another very good defense in the 49ers, he averaged just 2.17. I think that this is just going to be a really high flying game with lots of passing as well. So I don't even think he gets the volume to compensate for his inefficiency. So to take out my Cowboys bias for what it's worth, I am also not very high on Tony Pollard this week in this game. So do with that what you will. I'm not just crapping on DeAndre Swift because he plays for the Eagles. I don't think that either of these running backs have a good game this week. Moving on to the wide receivers, and then I'll jump back into some questions. It's Calvin Ridley. And look, it's not just because he has a backup quarterback. We have talked at length this season about how bad Calvin Ridley is against man coverage versus zone coverage. And unfortunately for him, he gets another tough matchup against the Browns defense that plays man coverage at the highest rate in the league. We saw him struggle against man coverage last week versus the Bengals, who play man at the third highest rate, where he only finished with 26 yards on 8 targets. There were a couple that were thrown downfield, looked really good, looked on target. He kind of caught it and then just bobbled it because the defender was draped too close to him. He just does not do well in man coverage. Add in the quarterback issues on top of that, and it just makes it that much worse. I cannot trust Calvin Ridley whatsoever this week. Another guy who I cannot trust is Tyler Lockett of the Seahawks. And with Geno Smith banged up, I really don't like this matchup at all. Lockett honestly hasn't been that productive all season long, but now he has to face off against the 49ers. While you can throw on them to some extent, they do rank 7th in DVOA to the wide receiver 2. And I really don't know if Geno's going to be able to get the ball to him with all that pressure he's going to face. If he is dealing with that groin injury, can't be mobile in the pocket, which he's already not the most mobile quarterback to begin with, he is going to be pressured all day long, not going to be able to get the ball out, and it's going to be very tough for these receivers to get open. San Francisco has been good in zone coverage and kind of bad in man coverage, to be honest. But unfortunately, that is the exact opposite of where Lockett succeeds. So I think it's a long day for the Seahawks, and I do not like Lockett. That said, again, if you don't have anybody else to play, do not go looking out for a scrub. I am starting Lockett in a couple of leagues just because I do not have any other healthy or better options. So just take this with a grain of salt. Finally, for the tight end, it's Evan Ingram of the Jaguars. And look, he did break the seal last week. He finally found the end zone, but this week is so much different. The Cleveland Browns have been tight end killers. They've given up the fewest fantasy points per game and ranked seventh in DVOA versus the tight end. We don't need to talk about the quarterback situation anymore because we already have. I think that the Browns shut this passing game down, and Evan Ingram is not a very good start this week. So that's the Start Ems Sit Ems. We will talk some more about that throughout the week on Twitter, on our Start Sit show on Sunday. But let's jump into a couple more questions before we move on to the sneaky cheaps. Blair, great to see you in the chat. I really appreciate you being here. Would I start Chuba or Lockett at the flex, full PPR? You know, I think I'm going to start Chuba. I really liked what he got going last week. And again, with that Tyler Lockett situation, I do not feel good about it at all. Chuba at least is getting the carries. So he's getting the touches. I feel much better about that than I do Lockett. Um, Although I don't feel great about either one, to be honest, but it is Chuba for me. Chargy asks, what do you think of Browning this week? Have Herbert, and I'm also worried about his recent play. So this is a situation where I think that I would still start Herbert. And I know that Browning had that very, very good game. But the thing with him is that we have not seen enough from him. We don't know what we're going to get out of him. It could have just been a fluky game. I need to see more out of this backup before I bench Herbert for him. So there's also some weather, I believe, in Cincinnati that's going to be a factor. So I think I'm more comfortable with Herbert in that situation, but we've got to cross our fingers and hope that he can get some stuff done. Kyle, feel that on Purdy. Just hope he doesn't put up a dud like he did against Seattle on Thanksgiving. And that always is a concern. There is, however, the worry of dropping him. I do know that it's a guillotine, but somebody else picking him up, using him against you. It feels very lateral. I'm a fan of sticking with the girl you brought to the dance or who got you here. And that right now is Purdy. Finally, with Tingley, hey, how's it going? Help start two, Moss, ETN, and HN. So I'm actually going to go with Moss and HN here. Again, really like Moss, really like that matchup. I think that it's a bounce back against a tougher matchup than you saw last week. And then HN. The Dolphins are favored almost 14 points in this game. And we've seen when they get ahead that they tend to move towards HN. They don't use him that much in the beginning of the game. But once they get a big lead, he takes over the snap share in that backfield. I know that Tennessee is very good, but HN also has that pass catching ability, that outside running ability. The speed that he has, I think, gives him more upside than so many other running backs that Tennessee has faced, especially with Jeffrey Simmons out this week. So I'm leaning Moss and HN there. So for some sneaky cheapies, let's jump into DFS. Again, on the accountability side, week 11 or week 13 last week was Brock Purdy, Jalen Warren, A.T. Perry, and Juwan Johnson. I did not have a good week last week, y'all. Okay, I'm fully admitting it. Purdy showed up and showed out, but for the rest, yeah, not good. So let's get back on track this week, okay? So first up with quarterback, I've got Gardner Minshew of the Colts going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. And I love that graphic, producer Tony. That is absolutely the Minshew aesthetic that I love to see. And he may not be the model of consistency that we like to see, but that's kind of what's fun about DFS, right? We can play the matchups, and this is one that we really have to exploit. The Bengals have allowed the sixth most passing yards per game, the second most yards per attempt, and they have also given up the sixth most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Minshew also has a lot of passing upside. He has 3 games this season with over 300 yards. He hit 251 passing yards 2 weeks ago against the Buccaneers. And he also has some weird rushing upside in the red zone. So don't count out a rushing touchdown from him either. I really like his price at 5,400. So I'm looking at Minshew. Next up, I'm looking at Chase Brown of the Bengals. And this is admittedly a dart throw. Joe Mixon does still lead this backfield, but the workload that we saw last week that Chase Brown saw was really interesting and intriguing. He got 9 carries to Mixon's 19, and he really didn't look bad when he got a chance to touch the ball. The Colts' run defense also hasn't been good, and even though they get Grover Stewart back, the absence of Shaquille Leonard obviously hurts them. They have allowed the fourth most fantasy points to the running back position, and I think if he sees a similar workload, he could really return value for what's close to a minimum running back salary. Next up for wide receiver, we've got Drake London, and we've talked about London over and over, but we are definitely taking him here. His up and down performances have made it really hard to set a salary on him, but he is way undervalued this week. Carlton Davis in coverage is just a big play waiting to happen, and there are also a ton of other injuries on Tampa Bay's defense. So I think the Falcons go out there, they have to win this one, and Drake London is a big part of that. Next up, finally, we've got Kate Otten of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this one could be controversial. I get what y'all are saying. I hear it. Otten didn't see a single target last week, but he was still out there running the routes and seeing these snaps. There really aren't many good options as well if you're looking to pay down at tight end. So if you are, I think that Otten has a good matchup against this Falcons defense that's allowing the eighth most fantasy points to the position, and you can definitely do worse when it gets down to the cheap selections for DFS. So that's it for our DFS sneaky cheapies. Also, just Tony, can you send me that picture of Minshew? I want a poster of that on my wall. Like I'm a little teenager. It's just too good. Mile High Luke, happy Friday to you in the chat as well. Now, however, it is time for our week 14 bold predictions. And I want to hear yours in the chat as well. So if you've got some, throw in there. But last week, I think I had a very good week in bold predictions. I wasn't that great in DFS, but for my bold predictions, it was really, really good. I said that Derrick Henry would score 2 touchdowns. Check. Said Devonta Smith would have 7 receptions for 100 yards and a touchdown. Well, he had 9 for 96 and a touchdown, so I'm calling close enough on that one. And I also said that Sam Laporta would finish as the tight end one on the week. So let's go with those bold predictions. Let's see if we can make it a good 2 weeks in a row here. So first off, I think that Devontae Adams finishes as the wide receiver one on the week versus the Minnesota Vikings. This one really shouldn't be bold, but it is. I mean, Adams hasn't been the dominant receiver that we're used to seeing this year, but this is the week that I think he finally reminds people just who he is. They are coming off a bye, they're all rested, and he does have a good matchup against Byron Murphy Jr. He's only had one game of over 100 yards so far this season, but I think that he makes it number 2 here. I'm predicting 10 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown for Devontae Adams to finish as the wide receiver one. Next up, I do think that the Broncos upset the Los Angeles Chargers at home, and Brandon Staley is finally sent packing. I don't really know how bold this is either, but the Chargers are still somehow favored in this matchup, so that's why I'm counting it as a bold prediction. Meanwhile, the Broncos just lost a very close game and almost took their win streak to 6 after a very bad start to the season. They are still fighting for their playoff lives, and a win here would just help them tremendously. I don't trust in Justin Herbert or that passing offense, as I've already said. And while I do think the Chargers can get something going on the ground, I don't think it's going to be enough to overtake the Broncos, who are playing much more complete football at this point in the season. For my third bold prediction, I think that the Chiefs-Bills game goes into overtime and that the Chiefs win by a field goal. Yes, I am calling an overtime game in Arrowhead. We have seen some great games between these two teams, but they're not really playing at that level this year. So this is why it makes it on the bold predictions. I do think they get back out there in what has definitely become one of our favorite rivalries, not only in the AFC, but in the entire NFL as well. But I think the Chiefs defense plays just good enough to shut down the Bills, and then they get their chance to drive with a field goal to win it. Finally, I think that CJ Stroud throws 2 interceptions against the New York Jets. And Stroud has been very good this season, right? We've all been impressed with him, especially being a rookie in terms of ball security. But I really do think that changes this week against the Jets secondary. There's no Tank Dell, likely no Dalton Schultz. His receiving options are limited. And I'm thinking that he tries to force too many passes downfield to Nico Collins, and they end up going into the hands of Sauce Gardner and or DJ Reed. I think that the Texans will ultimately win this game, but if one of those receptions is returned for a pick six, it's going to be a lot closer than we expected. So there are my bold predictions. If you've got yours, again, throw them into the chat. Tweet me at Britt_Flinn on Twitter, X, whatever we want to call it at this point. I would love to hear from you about your bold predictions. Before we move into our final segment, where has this hour gone? It's gone too fast, as always. It's too much fun hanging with you guys. Jonathan in the chat, McKinnon or Walker if he plays full PPR. This one, I think I'm going to lean McKinnon. I do not like Walker coming off that oblique injury against San Francisco. Don't like it at all. Don't really like McKinnon, to be honest, but at least with Pacheco out, there is some more opportunity for volume. Oh, we'll see. We shall see here. It's going to be a rough day for both of those guys, I think. So if you've been following the show, or if you're new here, you know that we have a brand new partner here on Britt's Fantasy Blitz, and you know them, you love them. It is our friends over at Sleeper. I'm sure that you house a lot of your leagues on their platform, but there is so much more to enjoy about Sleeper with their new Sleeper Picks game. You can choose 2 or more players, multiply your entry up to 100 times, and you can choose and mix and match from NFL, NBA, college sports, and more. If your fantasy season is in the toilet, if you didn't make the playoffs, there are also single week drafts that you can enter to keep your fantasy season going. To sign up with Sleeper and use their Sleeper picks, scan that QR code or go to fantasyalarm.com/sleeper. Use the promo code VAULT3 and new users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. So let's throw in a couple of picks that I like for this week here. And first off, I'm going to start with CeeDee Lamb, more than a half a touchdown at 1.74 times. He's had a touchdown in 4 straight games. He's had 6 touchdowns in the last 6. The Eagles' defense is not good against the wide receivers, allowing the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And while this is usually against the outside receivers, Lamb can really line up anywhere. He's also first among all wide receivers in red zone targets. And I think in this must-win game, we're looking for a touchdown. So I really like Lamb to have more than 0.5 touchdowns this week. Next, I'm going with Justin Jefferson, more than 5.5 receptions at a 1.66x multiplier. Yes, the Vikings are going with Joshua Dobbs at quarterback, but this is Justin Jefferson that we're talking about. He is as quarterback proof as you can get. The only game this year where he didn't hit that mark was the game he left with the hamstring. And although it was Kirk Cousins and not Dobbs, Jefferson is too good to not target and catch those targets against Amik Robertson and Nate Hobbs. So I like him to have more than 5.5 receptions. I also like Tyreek Hill to have more than 104.5 receiving yards. I know that the stat is very high, but this is Tyreek Hill. This is the GOAT of wide receivers this year. He's hit more than this mark in 7 games so far this year, and he does get a matchup against the Tennessee Titans, who cannot stop deep receivers to save their lives. We love Tyreek Hill. Get closer to that 2,000 yards receiving mark. I'm going more than 104.5 receiving yards. Next up, I've got DJ Moore, more than 67.5 receiving yards. And in games that DJ Moore has played with Justin Fields, he's averaging over 90 receiving yards per game. And in the last meeting with the Lions, which was just a few weeks ago, he had 96 yards and a touchdown. He's basically all Justin Fields has as a pass catching option. And he's set up for another very big day against a crumbling Lions defense. Finally, and this one could be controversial to some, I have Patrick Mahomes less than 2.5 passing touchdowns. And this may not seem like a lot for Mahomes, especially the Mahomes that we're used to seeing in the past, but he hasn't been able to hit this mark much so far this year. He's only thrown for more than this mark twice this season. And with the Bills coming in hot and fresh off their bye week, I really think that they are going to give him some trouble, especially since they don't have Pacheco to kind of balance out that pass and run game. So there are my sleeper picks of the day. Let me know what you think. Please tweet me if you've got some favorites. If you've got some questions, let me know on Twitter. And again, to sign up for Sleeper, go to fantasyalarm.com/sleeper, use the promo code VAULT3, and first time depositors get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And yes, Robert, those picks are way too easy. There's a running joke of somebody saying that, well, I just picked the easy ones. I just picked the easy ones. Um, that's fine. We're not out there looking for obscure things to wager on. We are looking for things that are great. So that's a running joke with us. But sign up for Sleeper today. We've got articles coming out all the time over on fantasyalarm.com with our picks daily. So jump on in and get involved with that. But guys, this is going to wrap up our show. We are close to the end. An hour already flew by, just like this week, just like this football season. Again, if you haven't downloaded the BetterCast app, make sure to do that. We've got so much fun stuff going on with lots more in the future to do. Also sign up for our All Pro subscription over at fantasyalarm.com/win. Use promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first monthly payment. Coming up next on the Fantasy Alarm and Better Sports Network YouTube page from 4 to 5 p.m., we have the Better Sports Betting Show with Dan Servadidio and Howard Bender. From 5 to 6 p.m., we've got the NBA DFS Live Show with John Mpemba and James Grande. But the action does not end there for this week. Catch us Sunday morning with myself and John Mpemba at 9 a.m. Eastern, Howard Bender and Andrew Cooper on Sirius XM at 10 a.m. Eastern, and then John and Coop wrap everything full circle at 11 a.m. Eastern again on this channel to make sure to answer all of your start sits for what should be a very pivotal and important week 14. But that's going to do it for us. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I look forward to talking to you Monday, seeing how your weekend went, hearing about how you all made the playoffs and or advanced in your matchups. Until then, have a safe and happy weekend. And as always, thanks for getting blitzed with us.